Okay, so we're now, okay. All right, this is Reality Check with Rishi. It's Thursday evening, 6:30 p.m. And today it's Tech Thursday. And I'm delighted to have David Holt, and a longtime tech resident of Silicon Valley, if I may say. Lots of excellent experience. He currently is the principal at David Holt Consulting. And we're going to talk a little bit about tech and the aftermath of coronavirus in terms of how this impacts Silicon Valley and the morphing and all the pivoting that we are observing right now, but more so about the next few months in terms of how this will play out. So David and I, we go back many years, and David also was our troop leader with Troop 581, and our boys, both of them, when they went through the Eagle, they went through the interview process with David. David does take the time to volunteer in the community. Is a very strong leadership skills is what David has. And also recently, I believe David is involved with the Girl Scout as well, right, David?
Well, thank you, Rishi, for the kind introduction. And it's actually the girls in the Boy Scouts, not the Girl Scouts, but the girls in Scouts BSA.
Yes. So tell us a little bit more about your background, David, in terms of what your experiences are and how have you seen the Valley evolve to today about what we have?
Well, sure. So I've been in technology since 1980. Pretty much the entire evolution of the PC industry, been heavily involved in that early on, the 1990s. I ran a company that became what was the nucleus of ATI for Silicon Valley, and then ran ATI for Silicon Valley after we were acquired. Right now, I'm a retired CEO and work as an executive advisor with startups that have proven product market fit and that are accelerating their growth. So high growth startups in the $10 to $20 million range of revenue. It's a very exciting time for a company, a time when it's necessary to build out systems, to hire the right people to take you to the next level, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a great time. And this is a really challenging time for startups. If you think about the economic prospects for our economy, the prospects for our economy over the next several months, they're very bleak. Yet there are some sectors where that's not the case, where there's actually an opportunity. And both companies that I'm working most closely with right now have an incredible opportunity to grow, to help in this situation that we find ourselves.
So that would be something we can focus on, Dave. Let's talk about these two companies, and specifically, we are always very curious because there's a whole lot of pivoting that goes on during this phase when there are altogether new sets of rules, new dynamics that are coming to play, and new handicaps, right? And so essentially, how do we all adjust with this situation? So I would love to hear your stories in terms of when you're working with these two companies, what are you observing?
Sure. So we can take each one at a time. Let's talk first about genetic networks. Genetic Networks is a very unique life sciences company. The company was founded 5 years ago on only $500,000 of angel money and has grown successfully using revenue from pharma and biotech to grow its business. So no VC money, and the company is very successful, profitable, and growing quite rapidly. What the company does is it helps pharma and biotech in the drug discovery pipeline. So we're able to give information about targets for particular compounds and also to connect genetics, the genes, to the efficacy of particular compounds as well. So we had a whole game plan for 2020. And that game plan has been put on the shelf because the company has completely pivoted right now. And what we're doing is we're going in and looking at FDA compounds that have been rumored to have a potential FDA-approved compounds to have been rumored to have a potential efficacy for COVID-19. And it's a massive effort that's underway at the company to go in and see if we can repurpose some of these other medications. And since they're already approved by the FDA, that means that doctors could prescribe them if they understood the methodology. So that company took this opportunity to go help the world and to completely change its business plan for the year.
That sounds very promising. That sounds really promising. So on this topic, not to diverge too much, but what we are hearing is there will be some changes in the industry. So I would like to talk a little bit about all the different verticals, and especially when you look at pharma, and we talk about how the raw material for the manufacturing of American drugs, I would say a good 70-80% or maybe 90% comes from China. And so now we are getting a little bit concerned with the dependency, because if supply chain gets disrupted, or if something gets unfortunately inserted into the raw material, that can create issues. So is that going to impact the companies that you're working with today? Or how does it impact the vertical going forward?
It doesn't impact the genetic networks, because we're a service company working to support the drug discovery pipeline early in preclinical and in phase 1 clinical. So it's early in the discovery pipeline. And what you're talking about are materials that are needed in production. And so that would be issues that would confront some Bay Area companies like Gilead, who are in production with medication. And some of those medications, actually Gilead has some medications that are looking very promising, antivirals for the treatment of COVID-19. So, and there's several trials that they have underway right now, clinical trials on that.
Are you a little bit impressed with how fast we are moving? When we look at vaccines, we are hearing lots of very positive stories, like the test kits. They went from 45 minutes, it was days initially, then it went to 45 minutes with a startup in Sunnyvale. And now with Abbott Labs, we are down to like 5 minutes. So isn't it amazing, the kind of innovation that we are bringing to the table? There's a crisis playing out, but in adversity, there is an opportunity. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's exactly, I think other companies have done exactly what we've done at Genetic Networks. They have looked at their assets, their roadmap for the year, and they said, wait a minute, there's a need in the world right now. Humanity is experiencing a crisis that there's no parallel in our lifetimes. The last time this happened was a century ago. And so if your company can help, not only are you going to do the world a favor, but it's good for your company, and it provides an opportunity for growth.
Yep. So, we had the Spanish flu back in 1918, which interestingly I discovered that I think it originated in Kansas.
That's what I've read as well.
Yeah, which is, I didn't know.
Should be called the Kansas flu.
So, and I think because of the World War, it kind of spread all over, and I think millions, I forget the exact numbers, but it was pretty scary. And then I talked to some friends, and they actually ended up losing quite a few of their ancestors, because of the Spanish flu. So it was, and in that day and age, I wouldn't think that we were that mobile, and we are not flying all over the globe, but still it impacted quite a few people. Now, today, it's very easy for a pandemic to happen. In fact, when it was first playing out, I said, it's a matter of time before WHO will declare it as a pandemic. And it took them a few days. But it was pretty apparent to all of us that this is going to go a little haywire. But is there a difference between 1918, 1920 to today?
Well, I think there is a huge difference. And I think you just talked about it a couple of minutes ago. The state of technology is 100 years more advanced. And our ability today to go in and understand disease mechanism, understand how why do people die? And it looks like there is your immune system goes into overdrive for a lot of people, and those are the people that are under stress and need the intense hospitalization. I'm certainly not an MD, so I wouldn't want to claim expertise, but that's my understanding. And our ability to go in and understand that immune reaction, our ability to understand the virus, how it replicates, what can be done to create a vaccine. Like there are multiple companies working on vaccines very quickly to try to get those to market. I'm sure that the FDA and the similar organizations, approval organizations around the globe will fast track approval once things start to look good in trials to get those vaccines to market.
Yep. So, I've been thinking about this vaccine. It typically takes about a year and most likely a year and a half to get these approved. And I'm sort of struggling because, I can see there are so many people who are jumping into this because they know that if we can find a solution, like that's the reason why test kits and everybody is trying to do something. But do you foresee something that, you have to go through clinical trials and that's the reason why it takes time. But how can we accelerate this through, electronic medical records, having that pool of DNA data, how can that perhaps help us? I think that, or maybe software technology to sort of go and iterate. Can we apply software to run through the clinical trials? Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's interesting that you asked that question because that's one of the things that we do at Genetic Networks is we use big data techniques, a lot of analytics to be able to understand for particular portions of the human genome, does the medication have efficacy or not, or are there liabilities associated with a particular compound or part of the genome? And so those biomarkers can be discovered, and that can aid in the clinical trial to speed it along and to make sure that you have correctly selected your test subjects in the clinical trial. And yeah, so that kind of technology can definitely enhance what's done.
So it sounds like you're sort of immersed in this area. So Dave, what about an electronic medical record? I think, and not one which is proprietary. How about like a public electronic medical record, which is sort of protected, but at the same time, it provides like CDC or World Health Organization or CDC. Let's talk about CDC access to all this data where they can apply in a case of a pandemic or, God forbid, a biowarfare to provide the tools that Americans need to protect themselves.
Well, I think you bring up a really great question. There's an issue around privacy and the use of data, personal data, that has to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed at a structural level by the federal government. Today, and I know that you are a proponent for universal health care. But today the concern is if an insurance company discovers what my DNA is, and I have a liability in my DNA, a genetic defect, that they won't cover me, that they'll kick me off, right? So let's presume a future where everyone is covered. So let's take that so that I don't have to worry about getting kicked off of insurance. In that future world, it will be highly beneficial for my genetics to be a part of my medical record so that I can get correct treatment. Because what's correct treatment for Dave Holt is very different than what is correct treatment for Rishi Kumar, depending upon the medication and the affliction that I'm suffering. Yep. And we are all different. There's so much variation in the human genome that's why there are half a dozen medications for every indication. It's because one medication works better for you, a different one works better for me. And we need to understand our genetics to understand which medication is the right medication for us. And that has to be part of that will become a part of diagnosis in the future. And we have to have a medical infrastructure that doesn't penalize people for supplying that information.
Yep, absolutely agree. You touched upon variations in genome. Let's double click that a little bit, right? So when I see, there is a huge impact to economy, and there is a social media dichotomy that is playing out where folks are very frustrated. They're like, why are we doing this? We should be out there, and we should all be productive members of society. We should have a vibrant economy, and it's been impacted. So that's one, and I've seen that not just from one person. A lot of people say that, and then I've heard our younger population, younger, like let's say in the mid 20s, and what they are saying is, look, Rishi, I can see a lot of bias. You are all protecting the seniors, and we keep talking about the seniors, but what about us? We need to make a living right now in this economy. So in a future state of a pandemic, let's say something happens, how can we ensure that our economy doesn't have to like shut down, right? I mean, this is what is going on. We understand the gravity of the situation. We want to protect Americans, and if we don't do that, if we keep running what we're doing, and the stark contrast is between New York and California. We have really curbed our cases. New York acted too late, and their cases have gone completely haywire. So the question,
Yeah.
sorry about the long, but the question really is, if we had that access to the genome pools, let's say that are most vulnerable from this. Now we have identified a pool of people that should stay at home and that work from home, and maybe it's like 5, 10, 15, 20% of the population, and the rest of us can go about because we are likely immune to the coronavirus. What do you think of a scenario?
So the coronavirus. Let's take COVID-19. It's a novel virus, which means nobody is immune to it. We don't understand right now why some people who are infected with it are asymptomatic, and why some people who are infected with it it's deadly for
Correct.
them. And then the people
Exactly.
we don't understand. So there will be a lot of research over the next year to try to understand that, to come to grips with that. The problem will always be if a novel virus enters the world circulation, that a pandemic, especially one that has the characteristics of COVID-19, which is a long incubation period, an asymptomatic period where you don't know that you're infectious and you're infecting other people. I mean, this virus is a perfect storm in some ways for spreading. I don't know if there will be a possibility of the kind of scenario that you're suggesting, just because a novel virus is a huge threat, because nobody has immunity. That's what it means.
Right, right. And I think there are lots of myths playing out. And what I've heard is that certain types of vaccinations that are not predominant in America, but in different parts of the world, they are essentially, if you have this type of vaccination, then you're probably immune to coronavirus, like you are asymptomatic. So there are lots of these talks going on. So essentially, if we are able to take this data, it's all about the data, then we can sort of create make it easier for us to get through situations like this. Now, this is a once in 100-year phenomena, looks like, and maybe we don't see it again. But we have to prepare. And what essentially, so let's go to the preparedness, right? So we do find a lot of challenges with how America was prepared, but we are not here to point fingers. What we did, you probably saw that, Dave, was we launched this neighborhood pandemic preparedness program to essentially help neighbors. We are building masks. We're doing a wide variety of things, which is what is happening in America, right? But from a preparedness standpoint, it's a call to action, because if you don't do that now, it will be pretty foolish. Now, when we look at Singapore, what they did with SARS that played out in 2001, they have handled this crisis very elegantly. They have done a really, really stellar job. And for example, temperature checks, like where did I go today? I was at the Valley Medical Center dropping off masks. And before I would even walk in, they were doing a temperature check. They had people standing at every door, and they were doing a temperature check. And I didn't have to do that because I was not going inside. But in Singapore, apparently every public place, even if you go to a dance party, you will have people standing outside checking your temperature. So it's going to be a different world. Now, what kind of steps do you see happening for us to be better prepared? At the federal level, we'll have to make some very hard choices.
Well, I think the first thing for the imperative for us as a country is to not be averse to science, but to embrace science.
Right.
Our country has become averse to science. We have flat earthers. I mean, come on. I mean, people using cell phones believing the earth is flat. It's mind boggling. So we have to get back to understanding that we believe that scientists are delivering fact to us, and that base policy around good science. So I think that is fundamental. We have to elect people who will put science first, and not other ideologies or profit, or near-term profit. We have to go with what science tells us, and that's what those governments that you're talking about did. They created rapid response teams based on science. And as soon as this happened in December, they went into action, and they created they already had practice, they already knew what to do, and they put all of these measures in place. So Hong Kong, Singapore, very, very rapid response, very low spread of this virus. And that's what we should look to as best practice for a pandemic response. I think our country would have been much better off if we had not eliminated our pandemic response team a couple of years back, and if we had instead funded that team and empowered that team, so when the time came, that team could tell us what to do.
So, interestingly, so this now gets into a little bit of a political turf, and you don't have to answer this, Dave. But when we look at what we could have done, it's like, okay, we are in a situation where the two parties, I think the vitriol has grown, like it's hit a crescendo, I would say, where it's a lot of like fighting. I mean, people are just squabbling over little things. And I'm just surprised that the stimulus package was signed so quickly. I was really surprised. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly because my expectations were pretty low. Is that a problem, you think?
Well, we can go in. I could spend another 15 minutes talking about why we have this bifurcated situation at the national level for politics. And it all has to do with our media and the profit motive of our media. And so media has created audiences that are profitable for them, and they serve those audiences. And as they've done that over the past 20 years, they've steered those audiences to polarized positions. And it's very profitable for media to do that. And that is why we have a polarized country, is because of the profit motive of media, and people are steered by media. We know that works. We know Madison Avenue has taught us that it works. For 50 years, Madison Avenue has taught us that it works, right? So, and as soon as we, it started with Crossfire. I don't know if you remember the CNN TV show Crossfire. That TV show was the very first instance of this polarization and how profitable it could be. And so it's basically for the past 30 years since Crossfire came on, it's evolved. So we'll stop at that. But that's kind of the causal factor, in my opinion, for why we have such a polarized electorate and polarized politicians.
You make a very good point. Very good point. Let's bring it back to technology. And
sure.
So Silicon Valley, we talked about vertical, right? I think the healthcare vertical is going to skyrocket, I think, in the next few years, because I think Americans have clearly seen an issue And we have to. And now also, when I look at in the early stages, we were talking about, yes, a vaccination will be developed, and I don't want to name the person from Washington, but the person said that, look, we might have a vaccination, but it might be very expensive. Doesn't mean that we'll provide it for free to Americans. They will have to pay for it. And if they cannot afford it, which means they may not get the vaccination. So what are we going to do? Are we going to expose certain segment of society and we'll let them continue spreading the virus? How does that work?
Well,
So, yeah.
I think it's back to, we should have a science-driven policy, especially on something of public health, an issue of public health of this magnitude. To do otherwise is just absolute lunacy. So I can't imagine you would charge for a vaccine for COVID-19. You want everybody vaccinated as soon as you validate that you have a working vaccine. You want everybody vaccinated, and then and you want to fix our economy. That'll fix our economy.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the dichotomy, right? I think, to some extent, when we look at Europe, a lot of the countries have a little bit of a socialism there, in terms of the protective landing net, for example, like in Denmark, if somebody's laid off, then the feds kick in and they essentially pay them their salary until the point of time where they get their next job. And this will, I cannot ever foresee that happening in America. But in a crisis like this, everybody's saying that the feds need to step up and help out. And so do you see like a semblance of like a social net emerging in America with respect to healthcare or with respect to everything else?
It's a great question. So I think it's back to fundamentals of how does the economy work? And the economy is based upon, a lot of what powers the economy is the velocity of money. And velocity of money is this concept of people, when they earn a dollar, they spend it. And then they spend it on something to where when that person the next person that gets the dollar, they take it and then they spend it. When the government puts money into a social safety net and allows people to pay their rent, then the landlord gets the rent and they can pay the payment on the building. And then, there's good velocity of money associated with social safety net. There is not good velocity of money with programs that line the pockets of the upper, 1%. Those monies go into investments which are long-term. They're not necessarily bad, but they do not have a short-term lifting effect on the economy. So I would strongly advocate in a time such as this, a government programs that provide safety net for service workers. I saw a news article projecting over 30% unemployment for the United States over the next month. And it's because we're a service economy. We have a huge service component to our economy. And those people are all laid off right now. And, we had, I think last week was 3.3 million unemployment claims. Wait till we see what happens the next week, right? It's going to get even worse. So
the number
if we get to
today was 10 million.
10. Oh my gosh. So any rate, yes, we need to do something about that. That is the best use of government funds, is to provide that safety net for people so that they can pay their bills, because that keeps the economy going. That'll keep the velocity of money high.
Yep, totally agree. And a couple final questions. Let's talk about different verticals and which vertical do you think will really skyrocket after this?
So,
then finally,
great question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the other company that I work with very closely is a company called Delegate. This company provides networking equipment and firewall technology, VPN technology, and that market segment right now is actually doing very well. The work from home trend has caused a lot of stress on infrastructure inside of corporate America to be able to support all the VPN channels that are needed for all the workers that are now working from home instead of inside premises. And so what we're seeing is quite an uptick in orders. And again, the company had to pivot. The company was working on a lot of new technology. A lot of engineering was focused on new technology that was going to be rolled out over the next 12 to 18 months. And that has been put on the shelf, and it's student body right, work on all of the features that further enhance the existing product line to support corporate America's push to have VPN connectivity with all of their workers that are now working from home. So I think that market segment is a segment that looks pretty good. Obviously, Zoom, that's a great example of a company that has done a fantastic job of providing a technology that was very needed, and of course all the competitors for Zoom. Providing video conferencing technology, loosening up on some of the restrictions to enable people, nonprofits, schools, all the people that have to work over video conference today. So that segment looks pretty robust as well.
Yep. And what I'm impressed with is how resilient Zoom has been, because we would expect a lot of crashes, because I don't know what their spike is. I would presume it's at least 3x or 5x or something. But it's holding up pretty good. I mean, we use it like a few times a day. And in fact, my brother is out in the East Coast, and we had a family gathering over Zoom, right? So people are using it for all sorts of purposes. And this company is holding up very well. No server crashes. And really.
Yeah, in our house, we have a college student home from college who's doing video classrooms in the evening, a daughter who's doing video conferences for scouting merit badges and whatnot. My wife is doing video classes with West Valley College, and I'm on business calls. We have 4 Zoom sessions running, competing with each other for the bandwidth and doing just fine. So they have a very scalable architecture. I think it's because they're a cloud-based solution. And so when demand peaked, they were able to scale cloud resources rapidly.
Yep, that's the beauty of the stretchable cloud world, and I wish we could do that everywhere. So final question is, any specific words of advice you have for someone who is founding a startup today, and while they are dealing with the situation now, what would you advise them as they look to get this going off the ground?
Well, it depends upon what stage of starting up, are you talking like pre-revenue, 10, 15 people kind of stage, or what stage are you referring to?
Yeah, okay. Very early stages.
All right, so I think if you can build your company to operate virtually today, then the habits that you put in place so that your company can function well in this virtual world will be habits that allow you to scale. So actually, it's going to force your startup to create a culture that will scale very well after the crisis is over. Because now you're going to be able to hire people not just in your locale, but all over, and integrate them into your team and work with them and be efficient and be productive and know how to work over video conferencing and get the best people from all over the world, not just the location that you're in. So I think that's probably a really interesting benefit for starting up in this environment of work from home.
Yep, great points. Dave, thank you so much for taking the time. It's a pleasure chatting with you. I know you're a busy man, so really appreciate you spending some time. And
it's my pleasure, Rishi.
We'll be in touch. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.